Welcome to Unit 6. In an earlier unit, we've already looked at the developments and key milestones in the development of nursing theory. In this unit, what we need to do is to have a look at some of the images that illustrate the kind of developments that have taken place in nursing and nursing theory. What do these images tell you? For this unit, what I'd like you to do is to try to find some illustrations of nursing in whatever form you'd like that picture nursing during the 1950s, 1960s and 1970s. What do those pictures tell you? In order to illustrate the task, I've chosen a few pictures of my own. I've cheated slightly in that I've gone beyond the requirements of the 50s, 60s and 70s, but I did want to illustrate that point. Let's have a look at some of those pictures. The first picture that I've chosen is one of a group of nurses who presumably are just graduating, just becoming qualified nurses, and it was taken in 1933. I don't know who the little girl in the middle was, but presumably she wasn't graduating. Have a good look at the photograph. I'll leave it up here for a few seconds. What can you see? What is noticeable to you? To me, I like the long sleeves, and if you look closely, you'll also see that they've got cuffs on the ends of the sleeves. They're all wearing hats, of course. And look at the length of the dress. Perhaps more importantly, what is not in that picture? This second photograph I've chosen to show you is another graduation photograph of nurses taken about 13 years later in 1946. The hemlines have risen a little bit, but the uniforms look pretty much the same, perhaps not quite as high around the neck. Again, what is missing from this picture? Here is another photograph of nurses at their graduation ceremony. You can see that each and every one of them is wearing their training school badge on their left-hand side. The hemlines haven't changed very much. This is 1964, the date that this photograph was taken. The hairstyles are fairly similar. They're still wearing long sleeves. But again, what can you see that is absent from this photograph? Or in other words, what can't you see in this photograph? Here is a final graduation photograph from 1970, a mere 6 years after the date of the previous photograph. The hemlines have risen a little bit and seem to be regulation length, or knee length. Note that the sleeves are a little bit shorter, although all of the nurses are wearing, or many of the nurses are wearing wristwatches, something that would be frowned on today. Most seem to be wearing hats, although some perhaps are hidden by the bouffant hairstyle of the 70s. Now we see something appearing in these photographs. If you can have a look on the stairs, there's actually two men there. But there's still missing issues. Almost finally, I want to show you this photograph here. It's of Nurse Leroy Craig speaking in 1964 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary luncheon of the School of Nursing for Men, which was founded in 1914 and dissolved as late as 1965. So they had specialist schools of nursing for men up until 1965. Men were not allowed to enter the armed services, even during World War II, and it wasn't until after 1955 and after the Korean War men were allowed to serve as nurses in the military. Leroy Craig, the superintendent and director of the Pennsylvania Hospital Men's Nursing School, fought for the rights of men and male nurses, and fairly recently only fought for them to be able to participate in the American Nurses Association. In 1971, the American Assembly for Men in Nursing was formed in order to defend the rights of male nurses. And you might be interested to know that men were banned from some schools of nursing until 1982, as recently as 1982. Absent from all of these photographs, of course, is any kind of representation from black or African American or any other cultural or ethnic groups that might have lived in America at that time. Black nurses had their own training schools, and one of the first groups to graduate ever was in 1897, when a group of what was then called coloured nurses graduated from the Charleston Training School for Coloured Nurses in North Carolina. Potential African American nurses faced the same kind of discrimination as men in nursing. Although by the end of the 20th century there were 400 nursing schools in the US, almost all of those refused to admit black students. As a result of this, perhaps the first hospital schools of nursing for black women were established from the late 1890s, one of the first being the Provident Hospital in Chicago, and a few years later Freedman's Hospital for Nurse Training School began in Washington, D.C. And actually by 1920 there were 36 nursing schools for blacks across the US.